Let's talk some Manchester United. The news came overnight that Alexis Sanchez has actually left Manchester United and joined Inter Milan on a 10-month loan deal. The details of this are still coming out, but we're given to understand that there is no option to buy at the end of it. Andy Mitten joins us. Maybe he might be able to fill in some of the details for this. We're still speculating a little bit, I suspect, Andy, on the precise nature of this deal. Do you know yet exactly whether or not Inter Milan are going to be forced to make an offer at the end of this, or if it's just a one-year loan deal for Alexis Sanchez?
As I understand, it's a one-year loan deal where Manchester United will pay some of Alexis Sanchez's considerable wages. I don't think he's going to feature in the team this season, and he's a top earner at the club. And not only is that a financial burden, but it causes issues within the dressing room, because players, privately if not publicly, will say, well, this guy earns 60% more than me and he's not even playing. So it's not an ideal situation. It's one Manchester United wanted to avoid, especially after Nani. Nani went to Sporting Lisbon a few years ago. He was another good player. United ended up subsidising his wages because there were no takers for him, because he earned too much money, because his stock has fallen. And exactly the same thing has happened again with Alexis Sanchez. The way the coaches see it is they've got two bad eggs out of the club. They've got Romelu Lukaku and Alexis Sanchez out of the dressing room. I don't think there'll be many protests from fans about either of them going, but the attack does look a little bit light. And if Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's tactic of bringing younger players through and giving them a chance, if that pays off, then fantastic. That's the perfect situation. But Mason Greenwood's a very, very young lad with very limited experience. There's still other players there, but they need to be consistent. They started the season well, but Saturday's result against Crystal Palace was a terrible result.
Were you one of the people, Andy, when Alexis Sanchez was playing that piano on arrival at Old Trafford, that was pretty excited about the prospect of signing one of the better players in the Premier League?
Yeah, and I don't know one Manchester United fan who wasn't. I went to Alexis Sanchez's signing in 2011 when he joined Barcelona. I watched him very closely in Camp Nou, and he was an 8 out of 10 player. His job was basically get the ball to Messi, but he chipped in with a lot of goals. He was an effective player. But if he was that good, Barcelona wouldn't have sold him. He did well at Arsenal. So I'd seen his quality, and I knew the background story of Udinese catching him very young. And I thought he'd do well. Manchester City wanted him. Yes, the wages were horrendous, but there was no transfer fee. Not really. Henrik Mkhitaryan went the other way. He'd cost 30 million, but he'd not been effective either. And when I watched him in his first game, admittedly against Yeovil Town away in the FA Cup, who were 91st in the Football League, the assistant manager of one club who I know well, a high-level club, said, this guy is so much better than every other player on the field. It reminds me of Juan Varane in his first games at Manchester United, and I was excited by that. But it was like Varane in other ways as well, because he wasn't consistent enough. I do think he tried. There was no stories about him being unprofessional. There were issues in his life which didn't help. I don't think he fully settled into Manchester. I know he'd separated from a long-term partner. But you could see Jose Mourinho's body language watching him when he lost the ball. He was almost trying too hard. And everyone has bad games, but he was having bad months. He was getting chance after chance after chance. He just wasn't delivering. And people then started saying, well, is this guy finished? And I don't know the answer to that. Even last week, 10% of me thought Alexis Sanchez is not finished as a player, but 10% isn't enough. And I know that the coaches, they had doubts about how many chances he was going to get this season. It briefly looked like he was going to get good chances when Ole Gunnar Solskjaer came in. I went to one of the very early press conferences there. There was one car in the car park at 7:45 in the morning. It was Alexis Sanchez training hard. He put out those videos on Instagram of him training hard. And yeah, you know, the pre-season last year, I was going to interview him. The club wanted me to interview him as well. I can speak Spanish. And my argument was, this lad's not put his side of the story across. And everyone at the club agreed with this. Sanchez didn't want to do any media. And the club was saying, and quite rightly, you're getting paid a lot of money here. You need to speak to the fans. Yeah, I'm just going to concentrate on my football. So that left a poor taste, because if he had reasons, he never put them across. And he just wasn't doing it. He came back last pre-season, having had a rest, having not played in the close season for the first time in, I think, 9 years. He had one good game against Milan in Los Angeles, and then just nothing. And he's gone. I would say good riddance, because I wish it would have worked out for him. But it just didn't. And it will go down as an absolutely terrible signing for Manchester United.
Who carries the can for that?
Well, the recruitment that led to that, you've got to ask questions why Manchester United signed him. Did they sign him because Manchester City wanted him? Because it would have stopped Manchester City signing him? Because he was a free transfer? Although that status ended up creating the perfect auction situation for Sanchez's agent, which led to Manchester United paying so much money. And then when he did that signing, and everyone was excited about it. Every fan got caught up in it. He was versatile. He was world class. He was just what was needed. So United fans bought into it as well. But was he a long-term target who was scouted properly, or was he someone who popped up quite late, like Radamel Falcao, for example, who ended up being another disastrous flop for Manchester United? If you want a name, well, Ed Woodward sits at the top of that chain, so he must take some responsibility for that.
And yet, there's no repercussions for that decision, for the Falcao decision, for all of the so Lukaku, they get their money back on, and it looks like it was, it's not that bad a transfer in the long run. But you compare the strategy and the absence of a strategy that Woodward has overseen in all facets of the senior level of management of the club, including the recruitment of managers, up to and including the recruitment of their best players. And this guy, again, surely is getting away with the fact that he's not very good at his job.
He's getting away with it because he's got the confidence of his bosses, who are the Glazers. And when Ed Woodward said, I'm going to bring a sporting director in, and I wrote one of the original stories on that. I remember getting the piece of information on the way to an away game at Basel. He seems to be going in the right direction, but that has not happened either. And you've got to ask questions, because Manchester United's recruitment has been patchy at best in the post-Ferguson years. It wasn't perfect in the Ferguson years. There were mistakes there. There's mistakes at every football club. But United's recruitment leaves more questions than answers. If now Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is going to say, we're bringing young, predominantly British players through, fast, hungry, youth team players, great. That all fits in with the strategy of the club. But he's going to build for the long term. He needs short-term results. United fans will not accept finishing 12th just because they've got young guys in from Manchester. This is Manchester United. They're one of the 3 biggest football clubs in the world. And I was on the pre-season and wrote with optimism at the signs I was seeing. And he had a good start against Chelsea, against Wolves. But that result at the weekend against Crystal Palace was terrible. Now, there's going to be further bumps along the way. That's what happens when a young team is forming. The questions are, will Scott McTominay be good enough ultimately to play central midfield for Manchester United when he's 25, 26? Will Mason Greenwood be? Will Marcus Rashford? Will these young players be coming through? Is Dan James a good enough signing? I mean, the signs have been good that Aaron Wan-Bissaka, Harry Maguire, although the defence was culpable for both goals at the weekend. There's been a confidence pre-season, but I've written it several times. It's a fragile confidence. And if you lose at home to Crystal Palace, it doesn't matter whether you dominate the match. That result is an absolute stinker. And it leads us into Saturday's game at Southampton, which has become a huge game.
You're obviously, we talked earlier about your Spanish-speaking abilities and the possibility of interviewing Alexis Sanchez. Obviously, I wanted to ask you about what happened at Barcelona at the weekend. The new wonderkid has emerged, blinking into the sunshine. How good is the 16-year-old who made his debut at the new camp at the weekend?
Well, I went to Camp Nou on Sunday night, and I probably watch Barca 20 times a season in person. I do interviews, and I'm so professional at my job that I'd never heard of him. So as soon as it was announced, I had to Google him, and he barely existed. He wasn't even in the reserve team. He'd done well for the team below that, which is managed by Victor Valdez, and he'd had his called up. And there'd been some speculation a couple of days in the media before the game that he was going to get a call up because Leo Messi couldn't play, Ousmane Dembele couldn't play, Luis Suarez couldn't play. So that's why the young lads and Carlos Perez, a Catalan forward, 21 years old, he also came on. He also did very well. Do we know how good he'll be? Ansu Fati? No, but he did really well when he came on. He was the youngest debutant at Barca since 1941, and he came on when the team were ahead. It was a perfect scenario for him, but he did really well. You sometimes see players come on who've done well in training or in reserve and youth teams, and they freeze, and he didn't. He looked mature, he was flying into tackles, a bit too much for the referees like him, but it was a really entertaining game. There were 7 goals, very good goals. Betis play very open attacking football. They won the equivalent fixture last season, and they went ahead, and Barca lost the first game away at Athletic Club. Losing at home to Betis in the second game would have been a disaster, but as they so often do, they moved through the gears. They needed the experience of Gerard Piqué making his 500th game. Sergio Busquets was absolutely brilliant because he had an indifferent season last year, and Antoine Griezmann scored 2 goals, his first goals for Barcelona. You buy a player like Griezmann, you need him to stand out, especially when the biggest stars are sat in the stands watching, and that's what he did. So it was a very good night for Barcelona. Last night I went to the inauguration of the Johan Cruyff Stadium. It's the new B team home for Barcelona, 6,000 capacity stadium. Wonderful place. Jordi Cruyff was there, Johan's son, and that's where the Barca B team are going to play. And they need to rediscover their identity. This famed Masia system, which was very strong 10 years ago, it had faded away. But looking at the couple of players who came in at the weekend, they were both positive signs.
Should Antoine Griezmann have both of his goals rescinded due to the fact that he celebrated like that?
I wasn't a fan of it, and I looked down. I thought, what on earth is going on in that corner? I mean, the last time there was a major incident in that corner was when a suckling's head was thrown at Luis Figo, and this was obviously very different in tone. And I felt it was contrived. I think one of the club employees handed him a pot containing red and blue glitter, which he threw all over himself. Now, if you're going to do that, you've got to be fairly confident of yourself, but the kids loved it. I'm 45. The kids were screaming, and they absolutely loved it, and it created this very good visual image of him surrounded by the stardust. And it is only football. It's entertainment. Is it a real big thing in the bigger scheme of things? Probably not. We've not gone bust like Bury.
One last point. The Neymar deal is kind of back on the agenda. What have we got? 3 days left before this all disappears from our lives. I think it's a bit longer actually. But what do you think something's going to happen here or not?
Well, I was speaking to some of the Catalan journalists last night who were very in tune with the club, and I've got some decent contacts there myself. They do want him. Money's an issue. They feel he can come back and he can be good. I think ideally Barca would do some kind of swap with money with Ousmane Dembele, who they accuse of being unprofessional, pretty much is what PSG accused of Neymar of being, so there's a slight irony there. But Neymar was a success at Barca. He did get on with Messi. Coutinho didn't really. There were issues there. Other players didn't really. Zlatan Ibrahimovic famously didn't. And there was an edge with some of the players, but Neymar got on well with Messi. And Messi's the main man at the club. He's far more important than the manager, than the president. He runs that football club. And he went to PSG ostensibly because his father wanted a nice commission and he wanted to grow in his own right, and he bought into this dream, blah, blah, blah. But it hasn't fully worked out for him there. He'd be very popular if he came back, but Barca have wasted a lot of money on Dembele, on Coutinho, and their wage ratio is 73% of the turnover. The rest of the club is run very tightly. I know people who work there, normal employees, they're not getting pay rises, and so money is the issue. So I think if Barca can sort of spread the payments or work something out that way, then you might well see it. And if he doesn't come, they're still very strong in attack, and they've got backup with the youngsters who played on Sunday.
All right.
Actually, just before we let you go, Andy, just very briefly on Bury, since you mentioned it there, like in terms of what the last couple of days have shown us in the back pages across the newspapers, in terms of a lot of us actually coming to the story kind of newly, I think, really over the last couple of months when this has been developing. Like, what's your sense in terms of what this tells us about modern football? Because you do have a worrying sense that this isn't going to be the last club who goes by the wayside.
My sense with Bury, and I'm a Manchester lad, I've been to Gig Lane 30, 40 times. I watched my brother play there many, many times. They've got a very good hardcore of 3,000 or 4,000. They've got a great ground in the middle of the community. And I did a piece on them against their neighbours Rochdale in December 15. And there were a few red flags saying Bury's built on sand. And I know people who went to work there and the finances didn't stack up. And you know what? No one was interested in reading that. I'd write stories on stuff like that. And Bolton, I've been to Bolton several times. I was there 2 weeks ago, and they don't really perform. It's pretty sad from a journalistic perspective. You go there, you put the time into it, you dig into it, and nobody really cares that much until it becomes a national, international story when the club, oh, actually, they're going. No one's going to come in and save them. They didn't live within the means. There weren't Bury fans complaining when they were playing the best football in the division last year on the way to promotion. Bury fans are not to blame for this. The two most previous owners, including the current one, they are culpable. The EFL, for letting those people take charge of Bury, also are culpable for this. And a proud town of 75,000 people, not the metropolitan area, because a lot of this was a Manchester overspill, and there's big City and United supporting Bury. Some of Manchester City and Manchester United's most hardcore fans come from Bury. But a proud town loses his football club. Well, what will happen? They're not going to lose them. They'll reform. They'll be a Phoenix club. They'll rise through the divisions. I hope they enjoy it. They're big enough to be a football league club. But it's all really sad. And if any good comes from this, there should be far more stringent tests for who are allowed to run and be in control of football clubs.
Good stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Andy Mitten giving us some thoughts there on a range of different topics, including the Alexis Sanchez deal, where he has joined Inter Milan on loan for this season anyway.